Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, learners with disabilities have borne the brunt of the pandemic across Southern Africa and the world in general. With governments closing schools and migrating to distance education through use of state-owned distance learning platforms, most learners with disabilities across countries have not been able to access educational content and fully participate in education programs because existing systems have been ill-prepared for the added demands of state-sponsored distance learning platforms. This has led to state-sponsored distance learning platforms being insensitive to the needs of learners with disabilities. And yet, disability matters, especially in times of disasters, are a fundamental human rights issue. Challenges faced by learners with disabilities when accessing state-owned distance learning platforms have ranged from limited access to inadequate hardware and software provision that does not meet the needs of learners with disabilities. In some countries, major problems highlighted include poor access to internet networks and unsustainable data costs needed to access these platforms. Learners have also reported that they do not have necessary computer literacy and online learning skills needed to operate the platforms, as they are accustomed to using printed learning materials but cannot access these under lockdown. This is worsened when information on the platforms is shared in only audio and video format because it's inaccessible to people with visual or hearing impairment. Learners with these sensory disabilities, including those with albinism, express concerns of being systematically excluded from the learning process, which is only convenient for able-bodied persons. Time for completing assessments online has also been a problem. The assessment process on state-owned distance learning platforms is designed to cut off after a fixed time, but this isn't sufficient for students with disabilities. Learners have further felt that online staff are insensitive and disregard the needs of persons with disabilities. The emotional and psychological impact of this should not be ignored, with learners frequently reporting a loss of human dignity as they attempt to access and use state-owned distance learning platforms. All the problems highlighted through the insensitive state-sponsored platforms show the urgent need for collaboration among educators, government, and the private sector, particularly as we come to grips with the effects of COVID-19. To ensure that learners have positive learning experiences and complete their qualifications, governments and responsible ministries need to respond to the learning needs of all students. Stakeholders need to review the training and accessibility guidelines for distance learning platforms to be more inclusive of distance teaching methods sensitive to learners with disabilities so that they can complete their qualifications and live sustainable lives, thus preventing unnecessary dropouts. Failure to transform training strategies could lead to an even higher dropout rate for learners with disabilities. It could also lead to the delayed realization of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This right entails ensuring the provision of an inclusive education system at all levels and lifelong learning. The overall view and course of action for governments and responsible ministries should be to view education as a basic necessity that is accessible to all persons, ensuring that all learners, especially learners with disabilities, have positive learning experiences when accessing state-owned distance learning platforms, thus empowering them to live sustainable lives and fulfill their full potential.